Scary telling.
I've always been fascinated by the woods behind my house. Even though my mother warned me about the strange creatures that lived there, I couldn't resist exploring. One day, I found a beautiful stone that looked like the thing that followed me at night. It was mesmerizing and I couldn't help but pick it up. As I started to head back home, I heard rustling in the woods. I knew I had to run, just like my mother had told me. I didn't look back, even as I heard the creatures getting closer. I could hear their laughter behind me, but I didn't slow down. I had to keep running. Suddenly, I tripped and fell. I got back up and kept running, but I could feel the creatures getting closer. I knew I had to be careful, but I couldn't resist taking a quick look behind me. That's when I saw them for the first time. The creatures were different from anything I'd ever seen. They had bright, colorful skin that floated around as if it wasn't attached to their bones. I was so mesmerized by their appearance that I didn't notice the roots in front of me. I tripped and fell again, scraping my knee in the process. I got back up and started to run again, but the pain in my knee was slowing me down. The creatures were getting closer and closer. I could hear their laughter getting louder. I knew I had to keep going, but I didn't know how much longer I could run. Finally, I couldn't hear them anymore. I stopped and took a few deep breaths. I was exhausted and my knee hurt badly. I knew I had to get home, but I didn't know if I could make it. I started to walk, trying to ignore the pain in my knee. After a few minutes, I saw my house in the distance. I felt a sense of relief wash over me. I was almost home. But then, I heard rustling in the woods behind me again. I turned around and saw the creatures following me, holding sticks in their hands. I started to run again, but I was slowing down. The pain in my knee was too much to bear. I could hear the creatures getting closer and closer. I knew I had to do something, but I didn't know what. Just when I thought they were about to catch me, I saw a small cabin in the woods. I ran inside and locked the door, feeling safe for the first time since I had found the stone. But the creatures weren't giving up that easily. They started to bang on the door, trying to break it down. I knew I had to find a way out. I searched the cabin for anything that could help me. That's when I found a small knife and a map of the woods. I decided to use the map to try to find my way back home. As I was leaving the cabin, I saw the creatures waiting for me outside. They started to chase me again, but this time I had a plan. I followed the map, trying to stay one step ahead of them. Finally, I made it back to my house. I threw the stone out the window and watched as it landed in the woods. The creatures disappeared, as if they had never been there in the first place. I realized that I had narrowly escaped something truly horrifying. I vowed to never go into the woods alone again. I woke up the next morning with a feeling of dread. I knew something bad was going to happen. I decided to head back into the woods to retrieve the stone that I had thrown away the day before. I thought it would be better to have it back in my possession than to leave it in the woods where those creatures could find it. As I started to make my way back into the woods, I heard the crunching of leaves behind me. I turned around and saw the creatures following me, holding sticks in their hands. I knew I had to run. I ran as fast as I could, but the creatures were catching up. I could hear their laughter behind me. I wished I hadn't looked back, but I couldn't help it. The creatures were getting closer and closer. I knew I had to find a way to lose them. I started to zigzag through the woods, hoping to confuse them. But they always seemed to know where I was going. I could hear their laughter getting louder and louder. Finally, I stumbled upon a small stream. I knew that water would slow the creatures down, so I started to run through the stream. But my knee was still hurting badly and I was slowing down. The creatures were getting closer and closer. I knew I had to think fast. I saw a small cave nearby and ran inside. I hoped that the creatures wouldn't be able to find me in there. But they did. I could hear them outside, laughing and banging on the cave walls. I knew I had to get out of there. I started to search the cave for anything that could help me. That's when I found a small hole in the back of the cave. It was just big enough for me to crawl through. I crawled through the hole and found myself in a small clearing in the woods. I could hear the creatures behind me, but I didn't stop. I kept running until I couldn't hear them anymore. Finally, I stopped to catch my breath. I knew I had to find a way to get rid of that stone once and for all. I started to walk through the woods, trying to think of a plan. That's when I heard the rustling behind me again. I turned around and saw the creatures standing there, holding their sticks. They started to chase me again. I ran as fast as I could, but I knew I couldn't keep going like this forever. Finally, I saw a small cabin in the distance. I knew I had to get inside. I ran up to the cabin and started to bang on the door, hoping that someone would answer. But no one did. I knew I had to get inside. I searched the cabin for anything that could help me. That's when I found a shotgun. I had never fired a gun before, but I knew I had to try. The creatures started to bang on the door, trying to break it down. I aimed the shotgun at the door and fired. The creatures stopped banging. I wasn't sure if I had hit any of them, but I didn't hear their laughter anymore. I waited in the cabin until I was sure that the creatures were gone. Finally, I stepped outside and headed back home. I knew that I had narrowly escaped something truly horrifying. I vowed to never go into the woods alone again. After narrowly escaping the creatures in the woods, I knew that I needed to come up with a plan to get rid of the stone for good. I decided to head back to the cabin that I had found earlier, hoping to find something inside that could help me. As I approached the cabin, I could feel my heart pounding in my chest. I was afraid that the creatures might still be around, but I didn't see or hear any signs of them. I cautiously walked up to the cabin and tried the door. To my surprise, it was unlocked. I stepped inside and quickly shut the door behind me. The cabin was small, with only one room, a bed, a table, and a few chairs. There was a small fireplace in one corner and a few shelves on the walls. I started to search the cabin, hoping to find something that could help me. On one of the shelves, I found a small knife and a map of the woods. I took them both, thinking that they might come in handy. As I was about to leave, I noticed a small door in the back of the cabin. I opened it and saw that it led to a small cellar. I cautiously made my way down the stairs and saw that the cellar was filled with canned food, water bottles, and some other supplies. I realized that whoever had lived in the cabin had been preparing for a long stay in the woods. I took some of the supplies with me, thinking that they might come in handy. As I was leaving the cabin, I saw the creatures waiting for me outside. They started to chase me again, but this time I was ready. I used the knife to defend myself and tried to stay one step ahead of them. I remembered the map that I had found in the cabin and decided to use it to try to find my way back home. I followed the map, trying to avoid any areas where the creatures might be hiding. I started to feel a sense of hope as I got closer and closer to my house. Finally, I saw my house in the distance. I was overjoyed to be so close to safety. But just when I thought I was out of danger, I felt something hit me in the back of my leg. I looked down and saw that it was a stick stuck below my knee. The pain was excruciating. I looked up and saw the creatures emerging from behind the trees. They started to laugh, as if they were playing a game. I knew I had to keep running, but the pain in my leg was slowing me down. I hobbled along, trying to stay ahead of the creatures. But they were getting closer and closer. I remembered the cabin in the woods and decided to head back there. I knew that it was the only safe place for me. As I approached the cabin, I could see the creatures in the distance. They were still following me, but I was determined to lose them this time. I ran inside the cabin and locked the door behind me. I felt safe for the first time in a long time. I sat down at the table and tried to catch my breath. The pain in my leg was unbearable, but I knew that I had to keep going. I remembered the supplies that I had found in the cellar and decided to use them to help me. I used the knife to cut a piece of cloth and wrapped it around my leg to stop the bleeding. I drank some water and ate some canned food to give me energy. I looked at the map and saw that there was a small town nearby. After finding refuge in the cabin, I knew that I needed to come up with a plan to get rid of the stone once and for all. I remembered the map that I had found in the cabin and saw that there was a small town nearby. I decided to head to the town to try to find help. I knew that I couldn't stay in the cabin forever, so I decided to leave and start my journey to the town. I wrapped my injured leg with the cloth that I had found in the cabin and used the knife to make a makeshift walking stick. I gathered as many supplies as I could carry and set off on foot. As I walked through the woods, I could hear the creatures in the distance. They were still following me, but I tried to ignore them and focus on getting to the town. I used the map to navigate my way through the woods and avoided any areas where the creatures might be hiding. After walking for several hours, I finally saw the town in the distance. I felt a sense of relief wash over me. I knew that I was getting closer to safety. As I got closer to the town, I saw that it was deserted. There were no people in sight and all of the buildings were boarded up. I wondered if the creatures had already been there and caused everyone to flee. I cautiously made my way through the town, trying to find any signs of life. But there was nothing. The town was completely deserted. I started to feel hopeless. I didn't know what to do or where to go. I thought about going back to the woods, but I knew that I wouldn't survive for long on my own. Just when I thought all hope was lost, I saw a car parked on the outskirts of the town. It was an old, beat-up car, but it looked like it was still in working condition. I approached the car and saw that the keys were still in the ignition. I knew that I shouldn't steal the car, but I didn't have any other options. I got into the car and turned the ignition. To my surprise, the car started. I felt a sense of relief wash over me. I knew that I was finally going to be okay. I started to drive away from the town, hoping to find a safe place to rest. But as I was driving, I saw the creatures emerging from the woods. They started to chase after the car, but I knew that I couldn't stop. I had to keep going. I drove as fast as I could, trying to avoid any obstacles in my way. The creatures were still chasing me, but I was determined to lose them. I used the map to try to find a safe place to hide. Finally, I saw a small motel in the distance. I drove up to the motel and ran inside. The motel was small, but it looked clean and safe. I rented a room for the night and collapsed onto the bed. I felt a sense of relief wash over me. I knew that I was finally safe. I looked at the stone that I had been carrying with me and knew that I needed to get rid of it once and for all. I decided to leave the stone in the motel room and head back to the woods the next day to try to find a way to destroy it. I fell asleep, feeling a sense of hope that I hadn't felt in a long time. The next day, I woke up feeling determined to get rid of the stone once and for all. I left the motel and headed back to the woods, using the map to navigate my way through the trees. As I approached the spot where I had first found the stone, I could feel a sense of dread wash over me. I knew that the creatures would be there, waiting for me. but I had to try. I had to find a way to destroy the stone and end this nightmare once and for all. As I got closer to the spot, I saw the creatures emerging from the trees. They started to chase after me, but I didn't stop. I knew that I had to get to the stone before they did. I reached the spot and saw the stone lying on the ground. I picked it up and saw that it was even more beautiful than I remembered. But I knew that I couldn't keep it. I had to destroy it. I started to look around for something that could help me destroy the stone. That's when I saw a small cave nearby. I remembered the small hole that I had crawled through the last time I was in the woods. Maybe there was something inside the cave that could help me. I ran into the cave with the creatures hot on my heels. I searched the cave and found a small box of matches. I knew that this was my chance. I lit one of the matches and held it up to the stone. To my surprise, the stone started to crack and crumble. The creatures were getting closer, but I didn't stop. I lit another match and held it up to the stone. Finally, the stone shattered into a million pieces. I felt a sense of relief wash over me. The nightmare was finally over. But just when I thought it was all over, I saw the creatures emerging from the shadows. They were angry and they were coming after me. I knew that I had to fight. I pulled out the knife that I had found in the cabin and stood my ground. The creatures started to attack me, but I fought back with all of my strength. The battle was long and brutal. But finally, I saw the creatures starting to retreat. They were afraid of me now. They knew that I wasn't going to give up. I watched as the creatures disappeared back into the woods. I knew that I had won. I had defeated the creatures and destroyed the stone. I sat down on the ground and looked at the remains of the stone. It was nothing more than dust now. But I knew that the memory of this nightmare would never truly leave me. I walked out of the woods and headed back to the town. I knew that it was time for me to move on and start a new life. But I would never forget what had happened to me in the woods. As I drove away from the town, I looked back at the woods one last time. I knew that I had won the final battle, but I also knew that the memory of this nightmare would stay with me forever.